What is up, guys? You got NotTheWorst here, bringing another Black Desert online video, and today we are revisiting the Dark Knight Awakening PvE endgame guide. She did get some buffs recently that have had some pretty decent impact on her PvE performance. Namely, she got her Spirit Legacy cooldown reduced to 8 seconds, which is excellent. She got damage increases pretty much across the board for PvE in her Awakening skills. And she also has the access to Unveiled Dagger buff, that being a 10% attack speed now increased to 10 seconds rather than 5 seconds before. So it actually flows throughout the duration of her Awakening kit when you do get it applied, which has great impact on her performance. Before we jump into taking a look at Lightstones and crystals and all that, I do just want to throw this out there. I do have, thanks to Pearl Abyss, a little sponsorship going on. If you are going to be purchasing pearls and you are not on the Steam version, it does need to be the client version. When you go in to make that A coin purchase, you will see a little box pop up to support your favorite content creator. You can put in the creator code that's available there. Mine is NTW, and then Pearl Abyss does hook me up with a little percentage of the A coin sale on that. So rather than them keeping it all, you give me a little bit of it instead, and it's win-win. Still costs you the same, so can't really lose. If you don't want to, that's fine. Understand, or you're on Steam, no big deal. But just want to mention that the creator code for that NTW, if you want to help support your bro, much appreciated. All right, now that we've covered that, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Lightstones, and we'll take a look at that. All right, for Lightstones, the Awakening kit is not as cut and dry necessarily for absolute best in slot like Succession is. In that scenario, you'd run Deathblow on Succession, as we covered in that guide, and that's still a great option here. I do personally use that when grinding at Hex because of the frequency that those mobs are turning. I feel like the back attack benefits of some other sets isn't quite as strong for that scenario, but in a lot of places you could definitely be just running Vicious Shadows. That's definitely going to be stronger without a doubt at Gyfin, and likely a bit stronger at Trolls. Just in my testing experience, I do prefer Deathblow, but I could totally see someone running Vicious Shadows and having great results with that even at Hex. So either of those two options is going to be a really strong option to go ahead and run with. They both perform very well in this class. The Deathblow set, because you get the extra crit so that you are getting 100% crit on all of your skills, even if the T3 may not be on, you have a T2, and that includes access to some of her pre-awakening should you be using those with it, but it's not as significant as far as like being required to the kit like Succession would, where some of your primary damage dealing skills in Succession need that extra accuracy boost. So it's not as necessary here. If we had more back attacks at Hex, then it would just be Vicious Shadows run away at all three of those endgame spots that we mentioned. Some other honorable mentions of things that you could be running depending where you're grinding. The Wilds is always a decent option if the subspecies damage has a type, so you could run Demi-Humans at Trolls, Common Sylvia damage at Gyfin Underground. Hex, unfortunately, you don't have that benefit, so because the subspecies is beast or animal, so you don't have a Lightstone set that impacts those that species damage. So in those scenarios, you can run a couple other things. I have seen people run like the Wilds where it's just flat AP altogether. I don't think that's the way to go for it. I would look more into something as a fill-in of like Trained Fist or Enhanced Focus if you need a little more accuracy to help you hit 100% hit rate, although DK has pretty strong hit rate in general, and into Awakening you have access to Trap of a Deer to help increase that a bit, although you do have to land it on each mob, so it's tough to rely on that as a crutch. You can run the Enhanced Focus, get some extra accuracy, otherwise a little bit of boost in AP if it's going to help you hit caps for LV zones, so make sure you're just paying attention to that if you don't have Vicious Shadows or Deathblow, something like that. Target Openings is also an honorable mention here. The only apprehension I have with that one is if you've already got the Strike Stone for it, maybe just go ahead and commit to trying to get that Shadow Stone as well and make yourself a Vicious Shadow set. It's just all around stronger. The extra accuracy with the AP is nice, and then giving that 6% critical hit damage, but I think even at a spot like Hex, you're going to be better off just straight up running Vicious Shadows across the board there, especially if you're already hitting the accuracy and AP caps without that set. One more that I did want to mention that is feasible, but not necessarily going to work for your setup. It kind of depends. This set's going to be fast and rageous. Throwing this onto like a BSR increase percentage artifact set so that you have 120 or so, depending if you have any Tungrads, total BSR, and then running this set is going to help you maintain Z buff if you're in a scenario where you can't get 100% uptime. Personally, on main rotation at Hex, I've got 100% uptime. I can stay at Gyfin, and as long as I'm starting the hour with a Despair Elite spawn off of it, I'll stay at 100% uptime, so it's not an issue there. But It is a nice note to kind of run if you're doing maybe a lazy grind, so you're not really pushing, so your Z buff's not there all the time, or you maybe hit accuracy cap, you've got AP cap, and you just don't have access to these some of these more much pricier stones or more difficult to get because you have to sit on a pre-order on the marketplace depending on your market. This is a pretty decent option to run to kind of fill that gap. It's definitely just kind of a note for maybe when you're getting into stuff and getting familiar with the end game grind zones that we're talking about here, because you will find that it's just completely superfluous for this class to run it. Once you kind of get the hang of it and your gear's there, so you're just keeping Z buff, obviously you don't need this, but thought I'd go ahead and mention it for those that might be able to make use of it. And it's fairly accessible since as of recording this, disrupts are sitting on the market and they're not super expensive, a little over $1 billion silver each, which is fairly manageable. So there you go, some Lightstone options. Runaway best in slot to mention is going to be Vicious Shadows or Death Blow, just depending on what you're running with that, and you've got some options with other ones. So with that covered, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the crystals. I am actually going to use the same clip that we covered in the succession guide for the crystal setups because it's going to be exactly the same. So if you did see that one, you can just use the timestamps and head on over to skip past the crystals. It is the exact same feed. So here we go. All right, for crystal sets, I've got 3 sets for you that we are going to take a look at and kind of dissect what we're looking at for each one. The first one's going to be our general PvE crystal set. Now, this crystal set is basically set for the player that doesn't want to be bothered with worrying about what your hit rate is, calculating any of that out, your AP cap, or any of that nonsense. You just want a general, all-around usage, going to be good in PvE for whatever grind zones you're running at, and you don't care if you have a trillion AP over the AP cap or if your hit rate is 160%. It's irrelevant to you. You just want to make sure everything's good. So pretty basic with this setup. We have Crystal Elcars and Vipers for our accuracy rates in here, and then we have, of course, the Okrads for additional attack speed, some monster damage in there. We max out our crit rate while we're running Frenzy Drafts by having 2 Dark Red Fang crystals, and they also provide a little bit more AP there as well. The newer Crystal of Brutal Decimation gives us some additional back attack damage, which is pretty sweet, alongside some monster damage there as well. Of course, Rebellious Spirit Crystal you're going to see in every setup for PvE because they're just insane all-around stats. And then in this slot, we have a Gihren's Crystal. Ideally, you'd want this to eventually be a Gihren's Tear, one of the new primordial crystals. Obviously, obtaining those is going to take you some time, several weeks of running your boss shrine, so I personally don't have a tier at the time that DK got these buffs, so we're running a crystal. In the meantime, it's just going to take a little while till you can upgrade those, or you just get insanely lucky out of one of your boxes, or you win the lottery off of a pre-order. But obviously, the Gihren's Tear is going to be a little bit nicer. You can see we do have the 1 power crystal put in there just for a little bit of additional AP. We end up with a single slot kind of open, thanks to the effects of the primordial crystals, making it somewhat uneven. So just an additional extra little bit of damage. The next set we're going to talk about is for the player that does care about what their hit rate and their AP amounts are. So this is what we'll call the try-hard build, and this is going to be somewhat altered based on your gear. Why is that? Because you need to determine that you have 100% hit rate first of all. And if you have 100% hit rate at that spot, then you want to focus on making sure you're hitting AP caps. If we're talking about Hex or Trolls, they have a very restrictive 5% AP cap. So once you hit that AP cap, we don't want to focus on damage there. We want to look for additional damage modifiers, ways to increase our damage that are not additional AP. So in that sense, what we're doing with this is we are then running, of course, the Gihren's Crystal, and then we've got 2 Aulicus crystals put in here for an additional 1% attack speed. And the reason we run these over the decimations is if we're talking about like Hex, getting 1% back attack damage is going to be worse than 1% attack speed. The only exception to that is if you find that you do need the additional 7 monster damage off of a decimation. You could certainly swap out that Aulicus for a decimation, just depends on your gear. In my case, it's superfluous. The monster damage does nothing, and I want that attack speed over the back attack every single time. You then see we've got a set of the Ultimate Hooms. These crystals are just honestly godly compared to even previous Hooms. They have such heavy defensive stats that are a really nice gain in PvE. It's kind of a scenario where our offensive pressure at higher end grind zones is increased by having a better defensive presence. It's a huge HP boost, a huge DR boost. It does have a little accuracy to juice you up a little bit if you need it, and allows you to reduce having an additional accuracy crystal any additional accuracy crystals if you need them, dependent on your gear. Something else to mention here, talking about accuracy, you'll see that I have one Viper crystal in here. Honestly, in my gear, I do not need that. I can hit a 100% hit rate at Hex without it, so that could be swapped out for a Decimation crystal potentially to pick up that 1% back attack damage if you wanted to. You could go with a defensive option like a Bitterness crystal or something like that to give you a little more breathing room at Hex, and maybe not having to worry about getting a skeleton to blow up on you or one-shot at Gyfin or something like that, if those are relevant, but that can definitely be swapped out if you choose to. The reason I'm running one of these is my tag is currently Awakening Megu, and although DK on my gear has 100% hit rate at Hex, she actually doesn't, so I just keep it easy to have the crystal set up there. You may need it there, and you may even consider dropping an additional Olicus for Viper if you're short on accuracy. Obviously, Vipers give you the best bang for your buck on accuracy. The last set I want to talk about, why I didn't mention too much of an interaction with the tryhard set on Gyfin, is because we've got a separate set for Gyfin. There's one caveat to this. We can see that I'm running the regular Macalods. We're going to make believe magic pretend those are ultimate Macalods, because the point here is Gyfin has a 70% AP cap, so overstacking beyond the AP cap is still somewhat beneficial to you, unlike the Elvia zones where it's incredibly restrictive. So in this scenario, if those were ultimate Macalods, I believe we get a 22 AP bonus out of running all 4, versus we could just be running 4 power crystals and get 20 AP bonus. Obviously, we don't get the stamina or accuracy, but at a spot like Gyfin, we don't really need that. We certainly aren't going to need the stamina since you're moving from just elite pack 3 times over. So yeah, anyways, those should be ultimates. If you don't have the ultimates like I don't currently, and you want to run this Gyfin set, you could just swap those for power crystals if you wanted to, and be totally fine. But the ultimate Macalods are what the total goal there. Of course, Rebellious is always going to be running here. Then you see something interesting where we have corrupted crystals, typically best in slot for everything pretty much always. One of the new crystals, the Crystals of Mysterious Darkness, provide 12% back attack damage each, which can sound really enticing. However, the corrupted crystals are going to be better in any scenario that you're not 100% back attacking, which is most grind zones. However, Gyfin is not most grind zones. You are going to be 100% back attacking, or virtually 100% back attacking when you're at Gyfin, and these will outscale the corrupted crystals by a decent amount. You'll note that your trash loot on this increases pretty significantly. These crystals are extremely powerful for that zone and can really, really stretch out what you're capable of doing at Gyfin. It also goes without saying those can be paired really well with the Brutal Decimation crystals we kind of saw sprinkled into the other 2 builds. Again, additional back attack damage on these, another 2% on it, and then we're getting 14 monster damage between the both of them on there. Here we have Olicus and Alcrad again. Again, Alcrads are just always going to be in a PvE setup, and Olicus for the additional attack speed, 4 more modifiers. If you're not happy with the attack speed, no offense, but you're probably wrong. But if you really don't like it, you can always swap those out for power crystals to just get more AP. Personally, I'll take 2% attack speed over another 10 AP that's capped for only an additional gain of 7 AP, but your mileage may vary on that. Then something interesting that gives us the kind of one slot. There's only one Dark Red Fang crystal. I know what you're saying. Not the worst. I'm not hitting 100 my max critical hit here, so I'm affecting my critical hit rate. Well, because we are back attacking and we have all these wild back attack damage amounts here, you can run a Giant's Draft to give you maximum crit rate with just 1 Red Fang crystal, freeing up an additional crystal slot for you so that you can run all these other additional modifiers. The difference between the Giant's Draft and the Frenzy Draft is virtually the same. The Frenzy Draft might slightly edge it out, but I don't know that you're going to see much of a real world difference. And then when you're getting to pick up an additional Brutal Decimation crystal for it, it's going to make up for that difference. So we still get our max critical hit rate with just the 1 Dark Red Fang crystal, since we are running a Giants over Frenzy for it. And then lastly, of course, always in PvE, you're going to be running that Gearins. Again, if you have a tier, definitely run the tier. It's strictly better, but for now, we're running Crystal because it's all we have until we win the RNG lotto. So there you have it for the crystal setups. Let's go ahead and get in talking about the add-ons and see how that's going to tie in with our skill rotation as well. Okay, for our skill add-ons, it's pretty straightforward. I do always mention in these portions of the videos that your skill add-ons should reflect how your skill rotation works to make sure that you're not overlapping. I throw that out there because in general, you know, you'll typically take something like this and then kind of make it your own as you get more comfortable with the class in the end game experience. And same thing with the skill rotation. If you're modifying what we use for the skill rotation, you want to change your add-ons to make sure that's reflected, and vice versa. If you want to tweak your add-ons, make sure the skill rotation that you're using makes sense to go in line with that. So with that said, this setup goes with the rotation that we are going to be using. This mostly factors around making sure we have as much crit as possible. And again, as we mentioned, the Lightstones section, Deathblow helps out with this. Our cluster of Despair, since it doesn't have innate 100% crit rate, it's got 50%. So getting the extra 30% off of the skill add-on when we use Trap of a Deer, since it's a tier 3, is going to set us up for our cluster Despair to have the max crit. Now, I know you might be thinking, why would you not just run the critical hit rate on Cluster of Despair, since it itself is also a tier 3? And that's a great question. The reason for that is because of the way that debuff and buff add-ons work. So if you see here, we have critical hit rate and attack speed 10% on Trap of a Deer for a tier 3, and then we have DP minus and critical hit damage on the Cluster of Despair. The reason for that is the buffs apply by hitting any mob if it's a buff, and a debuff needs to hit all mobs. So if I were to run the critical hit rate on Cluster Despair, that's fine, but I only need to hit any one mob to get that buff. I can then instead put the DP debuff on it. Cluster of Despair's AoE is much more targeted directly in front of you, a bit wider than Trap of a Deer, and it's going to apply that minus 20 DP to all of the mobs that are in the pack at the time, whereas Trap of a Deer is a little trickier to make sure it lands on each of the mobs. You're usually using it at the beginning of the rotation to kind of get set up and positioned correctly with it, so you may not actually get that minus DP on it. You could potentially swap the critical hit damage out with Trap for the critical hit rate if you chose. That's fine. I just like to have it there because of where we use it in the skill rotation. We're actually going to tap into a couple of pre-awakened skills so we get access to that Unveiled Dagger attack speed, and these skills are going to benefit from that critical hit rate increase as well. Cluster gets used after that, so it's not quite applied the same, but if you prefer it that way, that's definitely a swap you could make. The other things are fairly straightforward. Since we do have the tier 3 on Cluster, same reason that I don't put the DP debuff on Spirit Legacy, although it has its own DP debuff. The add-on I then put on Dark Nebula afterwards, so that it's staggered a little bit with where it's hitting the mobs. This more so applies at Hex than the other two zones that we're talking about, and that's because you kind of have somewhat waves of more mobs that will come into the circle at the time. So if you're applying the debuff on Spirit Legacy only, then the mobs that come in after are not going to have any DP debuff, whereas doing it this way kind of works off of when you're Cluster Despair, so that you're cycling either the 20 or the 15 based on what cooldowns are up. The good news is Cluster's only 12-second cooldown. This lasts for 10 seconds, so you almost have 100% uptime, and this kind of just covers the gap for you outside of that. Other things are pretty simple. We just look to make sure we have our monster AP. In my case, I only need 20 monster AP, and that's actually even over the AP cap for Hex when I'm grinding there. I would strongly recommend you calculate your caps for Hex or Trolls so that you don't have to put the tier 3 add-on on Trap of a Deer or Cluster Despair for 30 if you don't need it. If you're grinding Gyfin, you can definitely make that swap. I think it makes a lot of sense to swap that over maybe the critical hit damage 5%. On Cluster Despair, go ahead and put the 30 monster damage add-on there, since it's only a 70% AP cap zone at Gyfin, and it'll actually get you some extra damage. And you could also make some room for maybe a back attack, since it's going to be a lot more impactful at a spot like Gyfin. So that's kind of the setup. Like I said, just tweak that if you're going to change the skill rotation as well, or if you want to change this around, make sure the skill rotation makes sense. So since we've covered that, let's go ahead and jump into the skill rotation and see how everything's going to go ahead and tie together. All right, so let me go ahead and pull up the skills on screen if you just wanted to grab that. And just to note, I've got two different sections. So the side on the left has the skill names with the icons provided if maybe you're on console or something like that, or it's just easier for you to look at it that way. And if you're on PC and just want the skill inputs, I have those with the icons provided for you on the right. So either way you prefer, you have the options available for you. So I'm going to go through each skill on it and talk a little bit about why we're using what where, and then kind of just show you how it all chains together at the end. This skill rotation was designed so that you can use it endlessly, so you can just rinse and repeat, go from top to bottom and go straight back. It manages your cooldowns, and the idea here was to be able to manage it even when you have like your E or Z buff up. The key here is Cluster Despair having a 12-second cooldown is what needed to be worked around, so we put together something really nice that has really great DPS and can just go from start to bottom. As you progress and get like to, you know, really pushing some high trash loot numbers, you'll start to kind of mix and match a little bit and start to switch to more of a skill cooldown priority type list. Things like Legacy are going to be used in better priority, but you could just actually run with this and get some really insane results with her new PvE buffs. So first up, we start off with Trap of the Deer. Nothing really amazing to talk about here, just positioning wise, it's going to give us some back attacks right away, obviously, and it's a tier 3 add-on, which is really nice. It does have an evasion debuff on it, a very significant one. However, that's difficult to rely on, and I wouldn't really make that part of your hit rate calculations when you're deciding what your setup should be for where you're grinding. If you're crutching the Trap of Vidir at like Hex, for instance, number one, you have a 12-second cooldown, so it's not always going to be there. Number two, you're not even going to come close to hitting all of the mobs in each grouping just because of the way that that spot works in general, so it's going to be really difficult. I highly recommend not relying on the evasion debuff. It's kind of a nice to have, not a crutch you want to set up with. After that, we're going to go into Pre-Awakening because we want to get access to our our Unveiled Dagger. So we're going to use Wheel of Fortune. We have it hotkeyed here because that'll swap us from the Awakening kit into the Pre-Awakening kit very easily. Damage is great. If you are running Deathblow, it's even better at that point. And it also chains nicely with Blooming Black Rose, the Magnus skill, which did get a damage buff increase as well in this patch. So it's just a nice little flow, quick damage to throw in that swaps us to Pre-Awaken to give us what we really want, which is to use Unveiled Dagger for that new 10% attack speed for 10 seconds. So we'll just Trap of a Deer into Wheel. Right mouse button gives you just a quick second hit of the Blooming Black Rose only, and then we can use the Unveiled Dagger to get that attack speed, and you can see it's now a 10-second duration as opposed to the previous 5. This is really, really handy because then you swap back into the Awakening kit, and you'll have that attack speed buff throughout since you did use that. So I know a lot of people like to stick with a skill rotation with just Awakening, and in my older guide from 2022, I gave you 2 options to use, one with and one without Pre-Awakening. That's no longer the case because of the buff on Unveiled Dagger. Unfortunately, there's just no way to stay 100% strictly Awakening and come even close to what you can do by getting access to that Unveiled Dagger. What you could do is potentially just change how you're swapping. If you want to take Blooming Black Rose out, I suppose you could, but the DPS just makes sense on that skill when you're already using Wheel as a swap. Anyhow, Lunacy of Vidir is obviously a really nice swap, and if you're not running Deathblow, that's a pretty decent option for your swap to go into Pre-Awakening as opposed to Wheel, because it will also swap when it's hotkeyed for you. The problem with that one, since it's 100% crit rate, so Deathblow less important with that, but the problem with that one is it's a 15-second duration, which then makes it the longest cooldown out of all of yours, and it may throw off your infinite loop rotation in general. So just want to throw that out there. I know a lot of people look for that Awakening only. You can do it. If you do it, though, just know that you're leaving a lot of extra damage on the table without that attack speed. So after the Unveiled Dagger, we're going to go back into our Awakening with Spirit Hunt. We'll immediately go into Soul Snatch by just tapping spacebar if you're on PC from there. Then Grip of Grudge will then quick cast into Cluster of Despair very easily. Spirit Legacy, we've got our debuffs applied and we're ready to rock and roll. Then we're just damage dumping Seed Flow, Shattering with its flow into all 3 components then. Using the float in most cases, I suppose in some rare options you might want to backpedal so you can switch the input to go backwards with your Shattering Darkness. If you want to, but that almost never comes up in PvE. That's usually PvP-wise. Then after that, we're going to use Dark Nebula. And to note this, we are full casting the Dark Nebula. We're not quick casting. And the reason for that is both timing and the damage. This got this got the largest damage buff increase out of all the Awakening skills that were buffed. This one is actually massive for it, and we don't want to use the quick cast that's only doing the second hit of it anymore. We want both hits. It hits hard, and it's also a bit of a timing thing with making sure that our cooldowns are going to be back up for where we want them. Then we're just going to finish up with a real simple Spirit Hunt into Twilight Dash to get the mobs that way, and then Spirit Blaze into the Flow, which did get both damage buffs and the speed interaction from the regular Spirit Blaze into the Flow was increased, I suppose, but I got to be honest, the speed increase is only very slightly noticeable, so it's not massive. Other things you could do on that end instead of the Spirit Blaze Flow, although the damage is nice, you could throw in Touch of Exploitation if you needed it instead, just to give you that frontal guard protection. Maybe you're at Hex or you're still learning or something like that, or maybe something through a giant red circle on the ground that's about to blow up, so you're like, you know what, let me not do unprotected Spirit Blaze, I'll just throw Touch of Exploitation and continue through my rotation from there. That's totally viable, but from a DPS perspective, Spirit Blaze is just going to be strictly better there. So then you can just go right back into Trap of Vidir. You'll flip your camera back around so that you're behind the mobs again, and you can run through the full rotation without issue. So I'll go ahead and do that rotation with what it looks like all the way around. And there you have it. That's the full thing. And as you can see, we're back up to Trap of Vidir, so it cycles back without issue. So you can just go through the whole rotation up and down, destroy enemies like crazy because the damage is much better than it was before. The cooldown reduction on Legacy is nice, and like I said, as you get more advanced, you'll kind of work that as a priority to use when it's off cooldown. But if you want to just stick with the infinite loop rotation, because that's the most common thing people want to run, this is one of the best ways to do it. And then just keep in mind, if you need frontal guard on the tail end there, you can always throw in a Touch of Exploitation to keep yourself protected if that happens to pop up. Generally, she stays fairly protected on her own anyway, so it's not a huge concern, but it might come up. Exploding skeletons at Hex can be a thing for sure. So there you have it. I'm going to end the video out with just throwing a demo of me grinding at Hex with it, so you can kind of see it in action on mobs and kind of see how that works with it, and that's gonna be it. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to like it. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you get notifications when new videos go live. And if you'd like to catch me playing live, there's a link to my Twitch page in the description down below. Jump on over there, drop a follow so you get notifications for that as well. Also want to mention once again, if you are going to be buying pearls until August 12th, there is a promo going on. You can type in the code NTW when you're checking out for the A coin on non-Steam users, and that will actually give a percentage of that sale to me rather than Pearl Abyss, so it helps me out. Just a nice little way to show some support. If you're already going to buy pearls anyway, then hey, why not? So that said, that's going to be it for this one. I want to thank everybody for watching, and I will see you next time.